Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Feeding Frenzy. And we're going to break the mold on this edition with the upcoming release of the new Spider Man film, No Way Home. I started thinking about an idea. How far away are we from being able to engineer Spider Man? And sure, we can escape into sci fi territory very fast. But I wanted to explore the technology or research that is being done that could possibly get us to Spider-Man like ability set. So in this feeding frenzy, we will take stock of current research being done to bring the powers of Spider-Man to our world. We will begin with super strength. Super strength may be one of the most common powers given to any hero or villain. So my first thought here for achieving this would be through powered exoskeletons. The main limitation in their current state is that they are still very bulky and will heavily limit users' mobility. We would need significant motor technology advancements to generate more power in smaller form factors to make this feasible. And better yet, we would expect a similar suit to that of Iron Man wears, or even what Spider Man wears currently in the MCU, would be something that you'd expect to allow greater range of motion. And overall, we don't want to be looking like a walking tank and have a better range for mobility, as that is one of Spider-Man's hallmarks. Next up, we'll be talking about the webbing. Spider-Man's webbing and web shooters are core to his character, almost as much as his deep-seated responsibility. Without webs to swing on, you can't be called Spider-Man. Interestingly, we know very little about how spiders are able to make such a strong and versatile material. Currently, the state of research has spider silk being talked about for its tensile properties. Some research reports that synthetic hybrid spider silk could be a promising avenue to mass produce this material. However, currently, having a spider farm to collect that silk would not be economical. There are other hurdles. Of course, if you could package these components on a wrist-mounted device, how would you get it to dissolve in a couple hours? And I've linked a couple extra resources from research papers at different universities and just cataloging what's being done here. It's very high-level chemistry, so if you're interested in that area of science, I highly recommend you go check that out. Next up, we're going to cover wall crawling or super stickiness, if we're not being technical, and we'll start here. How do spiders stick to surfaces? So the feet of a spider is covered in tiny hairs. These hairs are so tiny they interact at the atomic level, in which the strands are attracted to the surface. This force is called the van der Waals interaction in physics. And in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, you can actually see how they show this to the audience, which is the fingertip of Peter Parker has these hairs that are growing that have barbs on them. And while the barb itself is not correct from a scientific level, it gives the audience an idea of the concept at play here. Some universities have experimented with the ability to cling to surfaces using geckos as the starting point for real-life examples. And the ability is based on the same principles, and they have made simple robots that can walk up walls. What makes these materials interesting is the stickiness is on when the pressure is applied in a downward force and released when the pressure is removed, which would make this an intuitive material to be applied for use at large scale. Next ability is spider sense. I was trying to get a handle on how we might technology our way to the danger sense. But as far as I can tell, there's no way to achieve this with current technology, and research is limited or not published yet if it is in the works. So I'll speculate wildly on how this may one day be possible. My first assumption would be that a suit as form-fitting as the one seen on the silver screen is possible. Embedded in the material, you would have sensors and tiny haptic motors that would vibrate on the part of the body to give you a perceived precognitive effect. This would be similar to how an autonomous car can brake when an object is in front of it, or with assisted braking, or AI braking, as they're called. And the way to achieve this sensing would be through LiDAR or other possible sensing systems, maybe even thermal sensing of the suit. The main limitation here would be capturing and processing data fast enough, and then the user adapting to a whole new set of stimuli to trigger a reaction. Because the human body is not evolved to react to this novel stimulus, such as the way you react when something is hot or sharp, I'm not sure this would be possible unless wearing the suit was constant so that the boundary between you and it would dissolve. You can find further exploration in Because Science on how the spider sense works for the spider biology. As I mentioned at the beginning, I wanted to stay away from genetic editing portion of this because it removed much of the how portion of the answer. You can just wave your hands and say it'll be done by genetic editing. After all, this is still being actively developed, so I still have to put it out there as an option that may one day be possible. With the advent of a genetic tool like CRISPR, we could engineer humans with spider-like attributes one day. This is closer to what the comics mean when Spider-Man has super strength or any of his other abilities. However, scientists are still debating what can and cannot be done when making changes to the human genome. So unless something changes drastically in the years to come, there is extreme caution in this area of research for the time being. And for more on this area of research, there is an excellent documentary from Nova titled Human Nature, and we had a podcast discussing this documentary, and you can find it linked in the show notes of this episode. And I highly recommend you check that out if you are interested in genetic editing at its core and what it means to be human. And another great resource about discussing the complexities is in the book by Walter Isaacson, The Codebreaker, Jennifer Doudna, Gene Editing, and the Future of Human Race. When I started looking into this, I was only somewhat aware of the technology going to each of these areas. However, when taken together to create what is effectively a super soldier program, you combine at a minimum of 4 state-of-the-art technology platforms to develop this suite of abilities. Ultimately, what makes Spider-Man compelling as a character isn't the powers in and of themselves. Instead, it's how man uses those powers for the greater good. And I'm sure many of the researchers in these areas are just as inspired by those stories as I am. It is important to remember that everything starts with an idea and then it becomes, how do we make it real? When they created Spider-Man, they had no way of knowing that these abilities of the character would be plausible. While we are still further away than I would have hoped, the threads are still there to one day make Spider-Man a reality. We just need to keep pushing technology further. And with that, everyone, we are going to wrap up this edition of The Feeding Frenzy. And what do you think about Spider-Man and how we could technology our way or engineer our way to creating that? I find this as to be one of the most interesting ideas I think I've ever come up with here, or like interesting case studies, I guess you could call it, to explore. I know this is very different from the standard format of the Feeding Frenzy that I do. Over some time now, I've been thinking about changing the format here of the Feeding Frenzy going into 2022 to be something more like this, where I pick an idea and try to encompass an idea in a more interesting way for you, the listener, so that it is more connected. So if this is something that you find more valuable than what I have done in the past, please let me know. I would really like the feedback as always. So I am glad that I did this because it is something that I think could be done more. It's in, right, as I always do this, but in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way. This is what feeding curiosity is. It's about finding interesting ideas that people may or may not be thinking about and kind of collecting those threads together and presenting it as such. And so with that, everyone, I will leave it to you to give me feedback. And I'd love to hear what you've been exploring, thinking about, and everything else in between. You can always find more of our content over on the website at feedingcuriosity.net. Or if you're on the YouTubes, you can find any other videos we have. And as of right now, you'll probably already see some of the other content we've posted here. And as always, keep feeding your curiosity, and I will see you all in the next edition.